Friends, hello. Welcome back to John's Comics with Kids and another one of my live stream omnibus review discussions. I can't believe I've got about 5 or 6 of these now. We've got several of them, and it's been a fun opportunity to grab those omnis off the shelf that I've been slowly collecting, read through some of them, and then get together with some of my friends to talk about them. Tonight is all about George Perez, or Perez. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. The writer, artist, who redefined Wonder Woman in the 80s. We're talking about Volume 1, the original run by George Perez as the writer, as the artist, and the 24 issues and one annual included inside this collected set. There are actually 3 volumes in this run. We're just doing Volume 1 tonight. The other 2 are out of print and harder to find, but you can still find Volume 1. If you are a collector and you're interested, you can still find it for relatively reasonable prices. So with me tonight, I have my most common omnibus homie here. We got JP. What's going on, JP?
Am I the most common?
I think you've done 3 of these now, haven't you?
Yeah, but I think Justin still rates as your most common, even though you guys do it like once at a time. But you've won more omnis than that. So
that's true. That's true.
You've been through 4, but I'm gaining on it because I just take one night. I take one night to do a whole thing. I don't make you go for a whole year to get through an omni, John.
That's true. That's true.
He does.
He's so 2 hours for one episode, for one issue. You know, you're a condensed concentrate. You're in concentrate form.
Using your time. I'm efficient.
Right. For those that don't know, JP's got his own swag, his own gear. You should check out his channel, which is linked down below. And you should get some of it. Old Wolf was wearing his today on his stream. He was wearing one.
Nice.
So they're all across the community. You guys should check those things out. So you and I, around the same time, we're talking and hunting for the same omnibus, talking about wanting to read it, talking about having never read it. And somehow you in this community, you can't mention Wonder Woman without sort of it's like you're sending ripples out into the universe, and you awaken the Kraken. And by Kraken, I mean Ryan from Magic Lasso.
What's going on? It's so nice to be with you both tonight. It's not about Diana Ross and an omnibus. It's about a different Diana and an omnibus.
Right?
True. This is true.
Yeah. When word filtered to you, Ryan, that JP and I were both, very close to having and diving into a Wonder Woman omnibus of this stature, what was the emotional roller coaster you went through here?
It's a lot. It starts out with, well, it's about time they read this thing.
I was going to get the about time.
It's about time. That's like the first thing that comes to mind. And then it's exciting for me to know that you're reading that for the first time.
Right.
And then I went back and reread mine as well, right around the same time that you were reading.
Because you have the same omnibus, right? We all have the same same collected edition.
I have it. Yeah. I took my cover off, but
I did. I've got mine right here.
I usually do. I put it back on when I put it back on the shelf after.
Sure.
I did the same.
Yeah. So I was excited for that, and I was like, when I pretty much assumed you would do some type of a live stream for this, and I'm like, oh, they're going to have a live stream. And then I was kind of like, oh, they haven't asked me to be on it. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. They don't have to. They're not obligated to.
I like how you're rocking while you do this.
Yeah.
It's
kind of like how it was. Response. It's like they didn't ask me today. I talked to both of them and neither one asked me. That's kind of how it went. So, and then I got the official invite and I was like, oh, yeah, I could do that.
I think it was more like Jason and I both saying like, you're supposed to be there, right? It's just
we wasn't going to get away with not having it.
Like, it was not optional.
It was not an option. So
I was just happy to be invited and to be here and talk about this run. So.
Well, I'm really grateful because obviously you bring to the table a massive amount of history and knowledge for not only this character but this era of comics, and so we're definitely gonna lean on you in that knowledge department tonight.
Sure, I've been with this character for a while, so we're pretty close.
You've read a few issues.
Yeah, I have a couple.
Yeah.
Well, let's say hello to some friends in the chat,
Yeah.
and then we're gonna dive into the prelude to this era a little bit. Firstly, I got a new channel member.
That's awesome.
8 o'clock this morning, or just before 8 o'clock this morning, JG joined the channel. I appreciate you, sir. Let's play a little something for you.
We got this city on rockin'. Yeah.
They play that song where I work, and I think of that every time.
They knew that from the Muppets, so that the time frame for this video is very similar to the Me Party video, because they were watching that Muppet film a lot. Huge thank you, JG, for joining the crew, and that means you're entered to have a chance to win the giveaway at the end of this month. There's a Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees trade paperback signed by the creator, so you definitely will want that. What is going on in Las Cruces? He was tailgating 5 minutes after JG, and then 3 hours later, and then 5 hours later, he was
dedicated to that tailgating. He is
right.
He is a tailgating extraordinaire.
Speaking of Justin, there he is in the chat. What's going on, Justin? This was he was an hour ago. He was early.
That's the in case Justin's wondering, it's the curly hair Diana tonight.
Yes, correct. That doesn't help.
And hello from Themyscira.
Yes, yes. Tonight you're with the Amazons and White Tiger Ruben Guzman, who, if you've seen that Daredevil trailer, White Tiger is showing up. So very excited about that. Cool. Ryan says, "Get us out from under Wonder Woman." I don't think that's a bad thing to be.
I was going to say, I'm not asking for that. I can be under.
We got channel member Conlon Comics in the chat. What's going on, Conlon? Good to see you, sir. We got the Sniper Who in the chat.
So let me tell you something about
Thursday
him.
Tonight.
Yes, he is here. I asked him, and I'm so glad that he's here. This is Nathan, and I sold him when I was working at the comic book store Perez Wonder Woman trade paperbacks of what we're talking about tonight. And he tried one and he liked it so much that he kept ordering more. And so he was really into it. And he also told me just the other day, he is reading Dark Phoenix Saga for the first time ever right now. Wow. And once again, like I said, with you guys, I feel that with him, I'm like, oh, that's so awesome. You know,
it's good timing.
Yeah.
Quality stuff for sure. We got Whitewell Comics dropping the Wonder Woman logo in the chat. What is going on, Alec? Thank you, sir.
Right.
We got Chet-Eye in the chat. He's saying hello to everybody. Hello, Chet-Eye.
I didn't know Chet read anything that wasn't X-Men.
I'm excited to hear if he has.
Yeah.
We got Agu Rhythm. I was on his live stream last night, hanging out with him for a bit while I sat in the car waiting for volleyball practice to end. And what is going on? Yes. Chet says, Rai, those lyrics to the Wonder Woman theme from the 70s.
That's where they came from. That's where they came from. Make a hawk a dove, stop a war with love.
There you go.
I don't know what all that means, but I like the sound of it. So yeah, this is a 1980s era volume. This is the relaunch of the Wonder Woman title. This is incredibly talented, huge star in comics, George Perez. Writing, he is drawing. Those of you like me that were, and like Jason, big fans of Teen Titans, we came with knowledge of what George Perez can do. But what I think is helpful before we dive into this is a little bit of background, because Wonder Woman, the character, before this volume, there was some tumultuous history going on here. Obviously, this was a classic DC comic character with many eras preceding the 80s. But Ryan, can you give us, I mean, I know we don't want to go on all night, but can you give me a little background into Diana leading into the Crisis event that was ultimately leading into this?
Sure. In the 1950s, Wonder Woman's creator, William Moulton Marston, passed away. Right. Okay. And so here we have, at that time, I don't think DC knew what to do with this character. And they were really at a loss without the founding father of this character to guide her along. So they tried a bunch of different things, from making her a romance comic book to introducing 3 different versions of the same character that existed at the same time. There was Wonder Woman, Wonder Girl, not Donna Troy, and Wonder Tot. And they would have these impossible adventures.
Literally Wonder Tot.
Wonder Tot. And they would have, supposedly it was spliced together film footage of all 3 of them together, and they would have these adventures. And then that wasn't working. And then they tried right at the end of Silver into the beginning of the Bronze. They put Denny O'Neil on the title, and they said, let's do something. We got to do something drastic because there's no sales on this character. So they took away her powers and they depowered her and made her a mod era Diana Prince.
Which I have sitting over there and haven't read yet.
I was going to say, that's an omnibus that JP and I both have, potentially to continue this discussion in reverse chronological order.
Sure. So they created this character, and that honestly just wasn't working either. And Gloria Steinem took offense to it at the time she was launching Ms. Magazine and said, how would you take a character that is so empowering to women and depower her? And that brought Diana back to being a powered character. Okay. So we're in the Bronze Age now, and they still didn't know what to do with the character. Steve Trevor had died and come back to life, and died and come back to life. There was all these different incarnations of him. Yeah. But more specifically, after several soft reboots of the character in the title, in the 1980s, it was a bi-monthly, every other month comic book that was being published. And they just, it wasn't that good. Here's one thing to keep in mind. Batman, Superman, your other big 2 trinity, they all have in their volume 1 story arcs that you can talk to and say, well, that's an iconic story arc for that character. Wonder Woman has none for volume 1. Not one. Nothing in volume 1 that's considered on that level that those other 2 characters have.
Is it partly because a lot of the stories were just single issue stories, not like several issue stories?
Yeah.
Is there some of that?
But at the same time,
or is it just the quality more?
Both. But at the same time, too, Batman and Superman were in those same style. And, they didn't do a lot of issue books. And they were really hurting in what to do with this character. And she wasn't selling. For those that don't know, DC, still to this day, has to publish X number of comic books with Wonder Woman as the headliner or headlining superhero, or they lose the rights to the character. Now you might say, well, the book doesn't sell. What does it matter? The money they would lose in licensing the character matters.
Well,
you're talking about toys.
70s. Yeah.
But you're talking about toy rights and clothing rights and movie rights and all that kind of stuff.
Boxes and
yeah.
Right. I wanted to for is it Nathaniel, you said?
Yeah, for Nate.
For Nate, this is the first appearance of Wonder Tot, 1963 and 61, issue number 122. So there you go.
There's no Wonder Tot on the cover, but Wonder Tot ended up on the covers of some issues.
I'm sure. I mean, mind blowing.
Yeah.
So and actually, one thing to say about that is Tom King, if you notice, has done the same thing with Trinity. There's 3 versions of Trinity. There's a young Trinity, there's a middle-aged Trinity, and then there's the Trinity in her 19, 20-year-old. And all 3 of those, he says he's going to incorporate into those impossible stories for the new Trinity series coming out this year.
Okay.
I can't keep track. So they have a character that is struggling to gain mass appeal, that has gone through several unusual eras, some slightly controversial, perhaps some entertaining, but maybe not with mass audiences.
Yeah.
So is this when they decide to throw a curveball with the Crisis event? Is that what happened?
So
next?
Crisis changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
And number 1, the entire brand is getting relaunched with first issue number 1s. No one had ever done that before. That was history making.
Yeah.
And they ran into a problem of here George Perez and Marv Wolfman did Crisis on Infinite Earths, a year-long event with 2 History of the DC Universe book supplements that followed. And here DC has this problem where they've got John Byrne doing Superman, which is awesome. They've got Frank Miller just finished Dark Knight and is about to do Batman Year One, which is awesome. They have nobody for their third biggest superhero of all time. Nobody. So apparently George Perez is at DC offices one day and he's taking a look at, because they got to put something out. They can't lose the rights to this character. They're looking at the artist and he has never named who this person was supposed to be. He's looking at this art that they're doing, and he says, this man is more used to drawing stuff like a Penthouse magazine. Every woman's going to vilify this. He says, this is the premier female character, and we're going to make her a raunchy sex object. He says, all the females that work for DC, no one was excited or happy about the direction they were going. And finally, he says, well, I do have a Wonder Woman story in mind, but I never thought I would get to do it because of Crisis, and we wiped her out. And he says, do you want me to give it a shot? I'll do 6 issues for you, and that's it. And they're like, oh my God, because at this time, George Perez can have his pick of anything he wants to do. He is that big.
Yeah.
And he says it was the first time ever that someone chose Wonder Woman instead of it being assigned to them.
Sure.
So, which is huge. So he starts on this, and he says by issue number 2, he said, I thought that I was just going to be replacing the artist. He says by issue number 2, they're asking more and more of my feedback and input, so much so that the writer gracefully bows out and ends up leaving the comic book industry.
Oh, wow.
And so the more he got into researching this character, the more he fell in love with this character, which is why he ended up staying on as long as he did.
And I'm sorry to keep quizzing you, but was it also researching in general Greek mythology as well as obviously the comic book lore of the character
it sure was
within DC? Because there's obviously divergence there in some ways.
Yeah, it was. And he fell in love with that. One thing, so originally Crisis was supposed to end. The way Wonder Woman ends in Crisis is she's reverted back to clay with no one having memory of her.
Which Nate was asking about that as well. Yeah.
Yes. But what was supposed to happen originally before Perez signs on, they were going to turn Wonder Woman into a statue. And I asked him, I said, when I had the chance to meet him, there were 2 questions that I had never heard the answer to. And that was one of them. I said, well, how were you going to bring her back if she was a statue? And he said, we had no idea. He said that was going to be for whoever the next team was to figure out how to do that. But in one issue, there was a miniseries called Legend of Wonder Woman. And if you want to share that image on the screen, Trina Robbins and Kurt Busiek did this. One time in published, we see Wonder Woman as a statue because they made this decision after this book had already gone too far into production.
Wow.
So that's our only proof that actually made it to the light of day.
This was actually going to be an idea.
That's crazy. There's a lot of people I missed, I realize, in the chat. We got to say hello to Kenneth Bird in the chat. What's going on, Kenneth? My man Whitewell Comics crapping on Silver Age like we do. Michael's in the chat. He says, don't forget the Kathy Lee Crosby Wonder Woman movie, more like the Denny O'Neil Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm.
We got Joe from Anachronic Comics. What's going on, Joe? Thank you for coming by. I appreciate you, sir. We got Christina Payne dropping everybody's links in the chat like great moderators do. I appreciate you doing that. And Brydazzle is in the chat. What's going on, Brydazzle? And then Chet's like, I need this education. I appreciate it. And yes, for those that don't follow Ryan, you need his link. It's in the description below, and it's in the chat as well. Like JP's, Christina's been dropping. Make sure you're subscribed to these 2 awesome content creators because I'm third in queue here behind these guys. So we've got now the makings of, in some ways, this beautiful blank canvas for somebody like George Perez, right? He's getting the opportunity to tell his version of the character. So I want to spend a little bit of time, and JP, maybe you can help me with this, on how you understand Wonder Woman versus how she was prior to this. One of the biggest topics I know is, can Wonder Woman fly? And I feel like it's one of those roller coaster, like, it depends on who's writing her, almost kind of things, right? When you were picking this up, were you like, Wonder Woman can fly? Like, what in your head, did you think she could just fly?
I did, yeah. Like, to me, I really did. The only thing I really, like, I knew who the character was from, like, the Super Friends cartoons and everything else, but I didn't really read Wonder Woman until, like, the late 90s JLA run, where she was part of that, and read, Justice League stuff and that kind of stuff. And then I read more since then, obviously, but I had never went back. So my understanding of her original story was basically, Steve Trevor lands on the island, and, bracelets and bullets, and she comes to man's world and go from there. Like,
and tiara, and
all of that very basic portions of her history that are just like generic in the vacuum of everyone's knowledge of pop culture kind of thing.
Sure.
But, like, as for the details, didn't really know what version of the gods, because depending on, you read at different times, the gods are very different in how they interact with her and her relationship with them. And so none of that I knew from how they relaunched it here.
Okay. And I'm kind of on the same level. Like, obviously the television show was very, planted a lot of deep seeds in John. I remember that series a ton, and then read most of the Wonder Woman stories I read were her in the Justice League. They were JLA books, the Mark Waid run in the early 2000s. There was definitely stuff that I read, but it was almost always as a team. It was very rarely the solo Wonder Woman stuff. I remember when the Gal Gadot films started coming out, and there was all of this debate when they started letting her fly. Like, can Wonder Woman fly? It was so dramatic. Yeah. What about you, Ryan? Does Wonder Woman fly?
Well, I mean, in the Bronze Age, she had an invisible jet. And if you could fly, why would you have an invisible jet? But in the Bronze Age, she could glide on air currents.
Ooh.
Which, if you might remember, a Marvel character seemed to be able to glide on air currents named Spider-Woman.
Oh, not the one I was thinking of.
Okay. And so Wonder Woman could glide on air currents, but she had the jet. If you notice, did you see any invisible jet at all in this omnibus?
I did not.
Was there any
some awesome winged boots?
Yes. Is there any, if my bracelets are bound by a man, I lose my powers? Nope.
No.
There's none of that.
But there is a fun history to the bracelets that I thought was interesting, and I was unsure how accurate that was beyond this run previously, like the history of the bracelets.
No, that's new to the run.
I love it. I love that they give a definition to those. So this is the kind of stuff for me that I really enjoy, which is the does George Perez reinvent the character or add to the character? I think there's a lot of discussion to be had because the characters had such a tumultuous history. I want to say hello to Brian. Thank you, Brian. He's found me through the X-Men Claremont reading order stuff. I appreciate you, sir. Welcome. We do these omnibus discussions from time to time. So tonight is all about Diana. Like people hitting the notification bells, saying hi in the chat. So yeah, give me your thoughts on Ryan on the reinvention of Diana, right?
Yeah, it's much different. I mean, here everything seems to have a purpose, and you start to see in this omnibus that George Perez lays it out. I mean, we start out the very first beginning with a caveman and a cave woman, and how that leads into what, it's not Diana, but it certainly leads into Diana.
Yeah.
So, and you see that everything has a purpose. At the time, I remember that this was coming out, there were some people, see, when you're reading this in an omnibus form like you guys did, you get done with the story, you can move on to the next one if you want.
Right.
But when you have a month in between and there's no internet and there's no spoilers and there's nothing like that, there
no
was some
water cooler talk.
There were some people that were saying, hey, I don't, there are people that loved it, but there were also people that saying, hey, wait a minute. this doesn't make sense. How come there's a gun on Themyscira? How that doesn't? But he's plants a seed that
Slow burn.
a year later, he pulls the thread on that.
Yeah.
You know, even in this omnibus, there's one little thread. There's a thread to Donna Troy in that omnibus that he doesn't pull that out for years later until he gets to that. I think it'll be volume 3 of the omnibus that he pulls that thread finally. But he lays the groundwork for it way back then. Which
obviously, as a Claremont knucklehead, that's like just normal for me. I don't know any other way to write in the Bronze Age than that.
And here, you know, a huge difference is Steve Trevor is not a love interest.
Yeah. You know what? I want to get to that. So let's let's talk a little bit about the beginning though.
Okay.
I want to talk. So JP, we open this omnibus, as Ryan says, we dive right in and we get not Diana, we get Hippolyta and we get Hercules and we get this unusual caveman story. And it kind of, for me, it instantly sets this man versus woman dynamic, right? This concept of male characters trying to dominate female characters, control them, the bracelets, as we mentioned earlier, and as Nate mentions, the concept of like being chained, being property, being controlled, and the way in which we have, you know, gods watching in like classic mythology from above, while Hercules and Hippolyta have this power play. What were your thoughts when it was like this? I mean, I had no complaints, but it was almost a completely different issue 1 than I was expecting. When you look at that cover and you're thinking like, oh, this is going to be all Wonder Woman. She's got the old, you know, television show costume. I'm in, and you get this story that's so different.
Yeah, I mean, you're expecting Diana leaving the island to be your kickoff, or the events that cause her to leave the island, and you spend basically that whole first issue, not all of it, but basically getting the history of the Amazons. I mean, and like why they were created, what the goddesses were thinking, and where the spirits for them came from, like, which goes back to the caveman story. And and you get, you know, how they came to be, and then what their mission was in man's world, and how they basically were considered to have failed because of what happens with Hercules, and how Hercules himself was twisted to do what he did by, you know, and it's like, because I mean, that's part of his story, is like his conflict with Hippolyta is one of his, you know, in the Amazons is part of his story. But so, yeah, you get all of this setting up this dynamic of why the Amazons are where they are, why they think about man's world the way they do, and, you know, what they've been, the trauma they've been through.
Right.
Which really leads you into the understanding of like why Hippolyta does not want her to go,
or why they don't want men to set foot on Themyscira.
Plus, Antiope has already left too.
Yeah,
and what was taken from them, you know, in so many ways. There's some really great, you know, chips on characters' shoulders right at the forefront before we even get to molding clay on the beach.
Yes. And well, and you were just talking about threads that he lays in this very first issue. He lays the split of the Amazons.
Yeah.
Like that the other tribe that we're going to find out about way later. Like, I'm not sure what issue, but we haven't found out about it yet. That's what really happened with it. Oh, I know you do. I know I know you do. And it's like, so yeah, he lays all these threads of, you know, he uses this opportunity to give Diana a completely clean slate in terms of there's no all that gold and silver age stuff. Don't worry about it. This is Diana coming into the DC universe today, post crisis. She's getting a clean slate. There's no, you know, but he, in addition to giving her a clean slate, he lays out this is the world she actually comes from. Yeah. So you don't have any of those things about being bound by a man and all, you know, all of this kind of stuff. None of that's there. It's still there in terms of the history of the bracelets and why they're important
for Hippolyta, especially.
But it's not got that other context to it, you know. So
And,
yeah,
and how did you feel about the way that was executed? Did you feel, because I came away with some, obviously I was busy thinking about, I love mythology. My girls love mythology. I've read a lot of this stuff. So to see it kind of through an 80s lens, I was really enjoying the subtextual things that Perez was doing here. And at the same time, trying to juggle in my mind what I thought was her origin and what I was gaining now as this origin.
For me, I think it was more just gaining the context. Like, okay, like I knew the basics of her origin, but I've never went back and read that Golden Age stuff. And I was like, so I'm like, for me, I'm like, I'm just gonna say this is closer to what I thought anyway. Sure. And so I just kind of dove in, and then we'll get to the Trevor stuff, which I actually prefer this to the other versions of, which I've stated on many occasions. But like, yeah, for me, I was just all in. I was just enjoying it, and I'm a fan of Perez, and I was enjoying the way he was setting this up and bringing Diana. And I love, we don't, obviously not in this first issue, but I love that when she arrives in Man's World, she's got to find somebody that speaks Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all Greek to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, it's not just, I just appreciate the way he goes about setting up the story.
Sure. So then, Ryan, from your perspective, how do you feel about, or at least can you highlight and pinpoint some of the changes Perez is making to her character, and maybe ones that you feel like were really strong decisions, or ones that you feel like were kind of interesting or unusual decisions? And we'll say hi to Fable in the chat. We'll say station to Fable. What is going on, my brother?
So let's give a prime example. Before, in Wonder Woman's origin, she enters the contest that her mother doesn't want her to enter. She puts a black mask over her face. She's the only Amazon with a mask on. This time around, here's this literal mask, like a face mask that Hippolyta used to defeat Hercules, because it changes your appearance. This time Diana takes that and puts that on, so she looks completely unknown to everybody, and she wins the contest. Okay, you're weighing those two scenarios. Which one weighs better?
Well, and all of them are like, I mean, even he justifies, like, all of them are wearing a helmet of some sort, so they don't know who they're fighting with.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't pull their punches against their sister. Like, but it makes it adds a factor of like how she pulls this off, that like people don't realize it's her.
Right. Yeah. Because it saves the reveal for Hippolyta, even though we as readers could easily guess what's happening and understand what's happening. The reveal is us ahead of Hippolyta as readers. Michael says, were any of you reading the Wonder Woman Volume 1 that ended with Crisis? I, of course, was not. I'm assuming Ryan has read some of that, but probably wasn't reading it at that time.
I mean, no, I was reading Wonder Woman solid from...
Even then?
Yeah.
From birth, from when you were born, all the way.
From you were born, out of the womb, you started reading Wonder Woman.
Well, not then, but I mean, literally bronze, mid-Bronze Age on up, I've been with this character.
I had an amazing X-Men collection at birth. It was really strong. I don't have all of them anymore. I did damage some of them. But I wasn't aware of, bagging and boarding back then.
Late 80s, early 90s before I started.
Yeah. So. What is up, Brian? One of my channel members in the chat. He's dropping those Wonder Woman logos in the chat. I appreciate you, sir. So some of my big takeaways, obviously, we mentioned the bracelets. I thought was phenomenal. We've mentioned kind of the mythology adjustments, which I thought were really interesting. And for me, obviously, Greek mythology steeped in, there's a patriarchy that's really dominating, and, Hera always subservient to Zeus, and, the power plays and ways in which the male characters infight. It's very Machiavellian. And then, of course, Zeus always becoming a human, going down and spending his afternoons, raping and pillaging, basically. I liked the way that Perez was, I don't want to say changing it, but I think recontextualizing some of those kinds of things I thought was very empowering. But let's look at the primary male figure, obviously, that most of us connect to Wonder Woman. That's Steve Trevor. JP, you hinted at the way he's used here. I will say my one complaint, my only complaint, if I were even to say it, is that he seems largely useless in this book and is only necessary as a thread that draws her to the real world, or the mortal man world, human world. Other than that, he seems wholly unnecessary in this narrative, at least in this volume.
And for the most part, Perez kind of ignores him. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
And I prefer, where I would have preferred Steve to be more useful, I prefer this to the, oh, she falls in love with the first man she ever sees. That's always annoyed the living crap out of me.
Right.
Like, I've always thought that was stupid.
All she needed was a man, is what
like
you're saying.
any man, and she's just in love. And I hate that. I've never enjoyed that part of the history. So the fact that basically Steve is just a means to an end, he becomes her friend, he helps her, but he's just a means to an end to get her to come to the main world, and that her actual guide in this case becomes this female professor we'll get to later.
Yes.
And like that she's still finding comfort in man's world, like her guide in man's world is still a woman. That, you know, for me, I think it works better. I think it actually, like, for the character and her place in how she, in her mission, it works so much better than, oh, I'm going to go to man's world because I love this man. And
wherever he goes, I shall follow.
Yes. I've never enjoyed that. I've never enjoyed that relationship. And like, so for me, I thought this was a great use of Steve Trevor by not really using him.
All right, then I guess, Ryan, which one of us is wrong?
I don't think either one of you are wrong.
Okay.
So, to be honest, though, in the entire Volume 2 run of Wonder Woman, and I'm talking creators after Perez, Steve Trevor just isn't in Volume 2 very much at all.
You mean, and by that I'm assuming you mean everything after Perez, not just Volume 2, the second omnibus, but you're saying...
No, I mean Volume 2, the entire run of almost, 20 years of books. He's not in Volume 2 very much. Yeah. Once in a blue moon, he gets a reference or a cameo. Same with Etta. She's not in the book very much. And this is an older Steve Trevor than he ever was before. He is aged up.
I definitely want to discuss that. Yes.
And he's never been in a relationship with Etta before.
Okay. That's his, basically,
that's new.
She starts as kind of like his attaché. Like, she's the one that is like, as a high ranking officer, he has I don't want to say an assistant, because she does a whole lot more than that, but a partner in some ways who is helping him with the military bureaucracy.
She's like his day-to-day.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you feel about that then? If you're saying 20 years worth of Wonder Woman comics, Steve Trevor is kind of sidelined as the Wonder Woman fan, is that a good call, a bad call, or just something that's unrelated to the quality of the story?
I don't know. I mean, if you're a Superman fan and there's no Lois Lane, because it's the same thing, really.
I would be very disappointed by a Superman comic that just completely ignored Lois Lane, but I think that that's a different relationship, in that they seem pretty consistently to be made for each other, destined, married, even with children. So they clearly are. The longevity and intensity of the relationship seems on a different scale than what we're dealing with Steve Trevor. For me, it might have just been surprising how little he mattered to the story, and how there was this whole other relationship, and how he was, again, like, to your point, aged up, where Diana seemed like a 20-something year old kid. Every drawing I saw of Steve Trevor, he looked older and older, and I was like, is this Tommy Lee Jones now? Like, I don't know how old they're going to make this guy.
Yeah, like, initially I thought, like, he's older than her, but by the time you get to the end of this volume, it's like, is he 50?
Yeah. There's
He
some
went from like
drawings of
30
him.
to almost looking like mid-40s. Like,
It really throws me off every time he shows up in the story. So the Steve Trevor, I guess it was probably expectation versus reality that I'm talking about as far as what I expected from that character and what I got from that character. But I was also just feeling like every time, and it became to the point where every time he came on panel, I was like, get out of here. I don't know this guy. Why are we even talking to this guy? Let's just keep the story moving back to the characters.
I don't know. For the longtime fans, though, that was nice to see because it did bring some sense of a consistency from Volume 1.
Okay. And
same
obviously
with Etta. Same because Steve and Etta were about the only and Hippolyta. And I mean, I'm not talking the Amazons, of course, because I think that's just a flat given.
Right.
But Steve and Etta were about the only thing from Volume 1 that kind of carried over even a little bit. Even though they're much different characters.
But they kept the plane crash. They kept the injured soldier and the returning him to the mortal world. They kept all of those kind of elements. But then it feels to me like they refocused the story on women empowerment. Like it seemed like the function was women as world leaders and leaders of study and knowledge and everything, because who becomes her mortal world, connection? Who becomes this person that connects her to our world? But a female doctor professor in college. I can't remember is it Harvard? Because they're in Boston, right? They're in Massachusetts for most of this. This Dr. Julia, and I'm not going to remember how to pronounce her last name.
Capeltis.
It's a Greek. I don't know.
I think it's Capeltis.
And she, not only being able to speak various ancient Greek dialects and knowing Greece with an incredible intuitive knowledge after all her years of study, also connects to Diana with this this tablet, this medallion that she touches and creates a knowledge. Visually, Perez does a great job with this splash page where you see her almost transported through history really quickly and instantly understanding pieces that Diana couldn't explain through her broken English or ancient Greek dialect. So the use of Dr. Julia K is vital in my opinion. And she becomes such a more interesting,
medallion Diana brings with her.
And then the next page
is like she gets like the whole history.
It's so wild.
Amazons and like
the hand. Look at that; those hands reaching out. So good. Get out of here, Kirby. We don't need Kirby. We got
George.
I vastly prefer the use of her as a conduit to Steve Trevor, because the instant shift is not just male female. It is that, but it is also soldier scholar. And I think the focus becomes knowledge, learning, connecting culture, and it's not war. And I want to hear your guys' thoughts on her as a character. And this for me is the schism, where it's not an Amazon culture just about war. It's about connecting these two cultures one to the other. They're still warriors that have trained. These Amazonians are warriors, but they also are, they have a very interesting, vibrant culture, and they're wanting to connect culturally. So I don't know who I'm throwing this to. Ryan, let's go. Let's go to you.
We'll let Ryan go first on this one.
Okay.
The difference between focusing her connection in the mortal world from Steve Trevor, the soldier, to Dr. Julia, the professor, seems important.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that Perez has talked about, that as he was talking to the DC editors and the powers that be, Diana's not so much a superhero like Superman. She is she's a mythological figure. And there's a difference between the two of those. And he was heavily influenced by Walt Simonson's Thor in the way that he, took Diana in the direction he took. Julia is absolutely essential to this, a brand new character to the entire Wonder Woman legend at that time. Her daughter, Vanessa, very important. If anything, with what happens with Vanessa later on, Vanessa will overshadow Julia in terms of importance Not so much in the Perez volumes, but later on in volume 2.
Got it.
And one other thing before we get away from the topic of men in this book, the biggest male dominance in this book is Ares.
Early, the first story, yeah.
I was going to say,
well, he comes back again towards the end too. I mean,
okay, because I was going to say in this volume, he's really just in the beginning of this volume, and Zeus and Hercules seem to have a bigger presence in this first omnibus.
Yeah.
Interesting to know that Ares comes back, because obviously Ares in that first Wonder Woman film, as the antagonist,
the first arc is very Ares focused.
And they even mentioned in the later arcs that his influence continues to sort of perpetuate drama in and among the gods, so I found that interesting as well. What is up, Cookie from Just a Little Podcast? He's in the chat. Good to see you, Cookie. Miss you, sir. I hope things are going well. And Nate is also mentioning the differences between Lois Lane and Clark, and Steve Trevor and Diana. And then the discussions in and around independence and feminism and empowerment, but also like considering how Perez wanted to get away from what he saw in the studio, and it's important to have the third biggest hero be uplifting certainly to women, but also to people in general. And when she is always subservient to Zeus and to Steve Trevor and whomever, it definitely hinders that.
She's not subservient even to a secret identity, because they suggest at one point, why don't you use Diana Prince? And she says, they said there's already a Princess Diana. And she says, well, does she, and Diana says, does she use a different name? And they said, no. And she said, then why would I?
And that's obviously a great comment, because when the character was created and through all the gold, silver age, Princess Diana was nowhere. There was nobody else that was Princess Diana. There was just Wonder Woman, and now there's competition, especially in British tabloids and what have you.
Yeah.
JP, did you want to say anything about that? The way they use this female Greek archaeologist character versus the way they use Steve Trevor, maybe?
And it goes throughout the thing, and it's not just like they do that, and then initially, like when she's approached, like we get in here that like she's approached with the Justice League, she's like, I'm not a superhero. Like it's about her mission and connecting her world with man's world and bringing this message of peace. And it reminded me a lot of, like, in more recent times, I think it was like, I don't remember for the writer or whatever, and there was a thing like summing up Wonder Woman, like first she extends love, and then like before she ever goes, like all these things that she would do before she would go for her sword. But like that's the last thing that she would do to an enemy. Is like it's love, understanding, friendship, and then she gets to, and I'm not, the line is really good, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but and like I just thought that was like the way he took this, and she's not there to like save the world in the superhero format. That this is about connecting, understanding man's world, trying to bring this message, trying to empower women, and like it's. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that he took this tack with her, that it was, and like I said, I never thought the Steve Trevor thing made much sense. And I think this makes a lot more sense for the character. I think it fits.
Well, and isn't part of that related to the fact that the original stories would have been wartime, and Steve Trevor being a soldier, and the focus being coming to our world to battle Hitler and what have you, versus coming in the 80s, a time where we're not necessarily at war. So now we're not talking about a character coming here to save us from, some faceless country entity, but instead coming here to be a representative of an alternative culture, right? A representative of something potentially better. And the way they present, Paradise Island, Themyscira, it's this haven of culture and beauty and compassion. This concept of caring and empathy that's really interesting. Even every single enemy we see her really combat, she comes from a place of like trying to understand them and trying to help them, not just trying to kill them. And I think that's kind of interesting too. Chuck Hensey is in the chat. What's going on, Chuck? I appreciate you, sir. He says the number of times that Steve Trevor has been killed, it's an odd relationship to consider that the TV show had a lot of to set people's minds. I mean, yeah, that was a significant part of the series on the show for sure. Michael says, I agree with the independent Wonder Woman, but I have to admit, I always liked seeing Earth 2 Wonder Woman married to Steve Trevor. Obviously, we want to see our heroes and heroines happy and enjoying the world they're living in. But I do think we get a lot of that here. I do think there's a ton of joy coming out of Diana, a ton of curiosity for this new culture and this new worlds, and joy to share with them and to connect with people. And I think there is a lot of that without being necessarily tied to a relationship in particular. Ryan, I know we kind of like skipped over some stuff that you were chomping at the bit.
I mean, it's one thing with, I just want to say about Wonder Woman married to Steve Trevor. I think that when DC realized, that they were going to wipe everything with Crisis, what they should have done is had the Earth 1 Wonder Woman marry Steve and then do issues with them as a married couple, because that had never been done before. And I think that would have been something different and fresh. But I digress a little bit.
You would have rather had that than this.
No, I didn't say I would rather have that. I just said
that you wanted that. Not this.
No, I would rather have had that than what they did with the character pre-Crisis.
Oh, you're talking about pre-Crisis.
Yeah, I'm talking pre-Crisis.
Okay, I think you said post-Crisis.
No, pre-Crisis. I wish that they would have done that, knowing that they were going to scrap everything and just start over again, because that would have been a little more interesting. Here we've got such a different take. Another character we haven't mentioned yet, but has a huge presence. She has a publicist. Yeah. Mindy Mayer,
tragic Mindy,
very tragic. And there's some people, another discussion at the time, the month to month with the fans was Perez doesn't put Diana at the forefront of the book. It's too much gods. It's too much Vanessa and her crushes. It's too much Mindy. What did you guys think as first time readers of this?
John, go ahead. You've been talking. You haven't given this much. Go first.
I never felt like it was lacking in Diana, because it felt like she was overshadowing even the moments when she wasn't in the book. They were talking about Diana, and I think in that way it worked. And it worked for me. I think not having her be a solo character book where she's just fighting a different villain each month was a very bold and wise decision. And instead it created a support system universe around her of people that were either, supporting her in her mission of connecting these cultures, or hoping to financially capitalize on her desire to connect these cultures. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought Mindy was a vital character in that, because it was true to 80s capitalistic, go USA, Secret of My Success with Michael Keaton kind of Michael J. Fox, kind of world where we're just like, let's cash in on something we can make money off of. And in that way, she was a fitting addition to the story, and a nice balance to Julia and her daughter, who had a very compassionate side and were very connected to Diana, the human, or the immortal, or the superhero, and not necessarily the image that Mindy was trying to create.
And I think Mindy was a great thing, because the whole point of Diana going was to try to bring her message. Well, how does she do that? And how does she and then seeing her have this interaction with this publicist that's trying to make money, and Diana's not really trying to make money, but she's trying to figure out how to get her message out there. And I thought it was a fun dynamic. It was a little bit fairly realistic, I guess, not realistic, but in terms of she's going to have to learn to deal with people beyond just, she's not just going to be able to fly it anywhere and how do people know who she is? How does she present herself? And, and so, and even when they get to the fair, that all goes wrong, and how that was, trying to do one thing and was a misstep. And I thought it was well handled. I thought Mindy served an excellent purpose to the overall story. I could get where people were like, "Oh, there's not a lot of superhero in this."
Like traditional, like fighting crime.
Yeah,
superhero.
The only superhero stuff is the battles with the gods and the monsters and so that are part of that whole thing. Like when they go with Ares, and then when they go below the island, and and deal with that threat and those kind of things. And so she doesn't really like fight super criminal. There's no super villains here.
She's not stopping purse snatchers.
She runs into two of her big villains eventually, but it's not really like she's not out like fighting crime when she does that. I mean, I guess there's like three. I guess you could say the cheetah and then the silver swan thing was sort of like more traditional crime fighting,
right.
But everything else is directly tied to the gods that she does and gets up to in here.
And how did you feel about that choice?
I thought it was great. I enjoyed it. I didn't think anything else was necessary. Now, I'm curious, we're 24 issues in. I'm curious where it goes. I think it's finally getting to a point where I thought it fit given why she was going back and forth and why she was there in the first place. As she spends more time there, like I think having more interactions than with other aspects of the DC world beyond just her gods will make more sense. But I think for these first 24 issues, it was really well balanced for me.
And I agree 100%. I think the decision to focus on the gods, the impact on how they created this culture with Themyscira and the Amazons, and how that is absolutely core to who she is and her worshiping, her entire religion is based on the fact that she has a tangible connection to her gods. She knows them, speaks to them, they speak to her, there's an interaction. If you just drop her into the mortal world and ignore all of that, I think you're robbing her of an identity and creating an identity just simply based on the mortal world. This, I feel like, grounds her in her own individual reality. And the stuff on Themyscira, whether it was the origin and then going to fight Ares, or the later story where she's basically doing her Hercules, feats, all of that was my favorite stuff. I thought that stuff worked the best. And hello to Bobby. He wants to say George Perez got him into this series, got him into this character. So absolutely agree. Nate is going strong in the chat. I appreciate you, Nate. He says, true. She doesn't fight super criminals. I like that. In a sense, she's doing something a little deeper considering her deal with the gods. I forgot she has those core religious things with that interaction. Then you take into account that even more pantheons and gods in DC. There's a variety of these sorts of cultures in our DC universe, and to ground her corner of it, I think is important. But Ryan, obviously you're a fan.
Oh yeah. I mean, that stuff's great. But another thing too is the reinvention of Cheetah. So
let's talk about that. Obviously, a character, she only gets a couple of issues in this volume.
Very limited.
In the
She'll
same way Steve Trevor is limited.
I just mean in this volume.
Yeah.
No, in this one trade, or this one omnibus, what we have is, it felt similar to Steve Trevor to me in the way that it was like, we kind of have to mention her and kind of have to show her, despite the fact that the main focus is going to be on the gods, the culture, the changes in Themyscira and whatnot.
So I mentioned at the top of the show that there was two questions that I never could find an answer for that I asked George Perez myself when I met him, and I already answered one of them. The other question is about Cheetah. And in volume 1, we had two cheetahs. Priscilla Rich is the original cheetah. Her niece, Debbie Domain, became the second cheetah. Now we have a cheetah named Barbara Minerva. So I said to him, when you reinvented Cheetah, why did you opt to use this name instead of just making this a new version of Priscilla Rich or Debbie Domain? And he kind of laughed and he said, I was at a party and I was introduced to a woman whose name was Dr. Barbara Minerva. And he said, I was introduced to her and I said, oh, that is a brilliant name. I love that name, and I'm putting you in one of my comic books. And this next part he didn't say to me, but I think he thought, I'm not going to make this a throwaway character. I'm going to make this name stay. So he made her a big character in the Wonder Woman universe. And that was his motivation why this isn't just Priscilla Rich updated.
And this is the name that's stuck ever since.
It has.
They haven't ever went back to those other versions. It's just Barbara Minerva now.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I also think that had Wonder Woman 1984 used a story based off of George Perez's Cheetah introduction in this omnibus, they would have had a much better movie.
Sure. Absolutely.
So
that's interesting.
Since we're here, Don, what did you think of this version of Cheetah?
I had no problems with the design, with the 2 issues we got, with the battle. My only frustration with it was that it ends very abruptly and it never goes back to it. Like, it wasn't even like hinted at in the next issue that Barbara was recovering from her wounds or whatever. Like, I would have liked a little Claremontian something, like a little nugget dropped somewhere to let me know like what happened after the weird like disappearance at the end of that issue where they battle.
Well, so yeah, we get this thing, and I feel like that's a victim of where he puts it in the story arc.
Okay.
Like, for me, because it was like, basically, we got the first story arc with Ares, and then she stays in Man's World a little bit, and she's getting ready to go home, and Cheetah comes after her because she wants the lasso, basically.
Right.
And that's the reason, like, Barbara's obsessed with ancient relics, and which is how she ended up becoming the Cheetah, and like all the stuff there. But then Diana leaves, and we go into this basically trial of the gods thing that goes on for like 6 issues. And so, yeah, we don't get back to Cheetah. And it's like, it would have been nice to have, when she returned, having some sort of glimpse of what was going on here. Because, the character hasn't gone away, and we just haven't went far enough yet. But I would agree with you. It's very abrupt, but it is really because we go into like 6 issues of Battle of the Gods or Trial of the Gods. Because she immediately leaves Man's World for basically the middle of this volume almost. She's back on Themyscira, or below Themyscira.
Yeah, Doom's Doorway.
Yeah. So
what about you, Ryan? What were your thoughts on this version of this character? Obviously it's become the overriding version, right?
Yeah, it sure is. It's actually an origin that makes sense compared to the original Cheetah, who had a split personality that was jealous of Wonder Woman, and seeing Wonder Woman would trigger her. And the second version, an environmentalist who was brainwashed to do the bidding of a terrorist organization. This origin makes sense. They kind of did, JP, like you said, they abruptly kind of cut Cheetah and then moved on to this longer storyline. If you notice, they kind of did the same thing when they came back from that storyline. They introduced Silver Swan and then kind of did 2 issues with it and dropped it and then moved on to something else.
Yeah.
So, which of course is another Wonder Woman character from Volume 1 that was brought in. And then essentially we kind of get Cersei.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, before we can either dive into Cersei, but I do want to spend some time on the trial at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, because I feel like for me, the overriding takeaway was I think we had talked about some of the recontextualization of the mythologies and the way that Perez is using Hercules and Zeus in those early stories is very classic Greek mythology. The difference is when you shift the focus away from the male characters and onto the sort of victims of the male characters, you shift it to Hippolyta, you shift it to Diana, you get a very different perspective. And it really hit for me when Zeus does his classic trick of, yes, let me show up and you give you your reward. You did well for me out in the world. You get the D. You get Zeus's D now.
Yeah, literally, she's the only reason they still exist.
Yes.
Like, Ares was going to win, and the rest of the gods were going across the river Styx. Like,
correct.
They were all going were all dying.
Yeah.
She saves them all, and he decides, I should reward her by making her my concubine.
Exactly.
You know?
And he summons her, and she flies into the sky, and she, of course, dutifully to her god is like,
Yeah.
yes, I'm here for you. And then he's like, let's bang. And she's like, what? Right? And my favorite part was Hippolyta basically saying, I've seen this play before and I know how it ends and I'm not okay with it. And she rides out and confronts Zeus and basically says, you tried to pull this crap with your son before. Now you're pulling it again now. I do not accept this. And you get the moment when Hera basically pulls the string on him, which never happened in mythology, right? Hera never stood up to Zeus.
Hera always punished the victims.
Absolutely.
She always punished the victims.
Yes. And so instead, now you see Hera pull him back, and Hera is now standing up saying, the women are right. Stop being such a douche, like just jerk. And what I like about this storyline is that it finds a nice, even like middle ground where Zeus doesn't have to be, like a feminist. He's still Zeus, but instead now Diana is given her own Hercules trials, her own tasks to complete to prove herself worthy, although she's done it already, let's be honest. And in return, you get to see two, visions of male empowerment, Hercules and Zeus, brought to a deeper understanding. And this, for me, this was the reason I made that short that was like, George Perez is a feminist, right? Like this is clear in this storyline that he is promoting, and maybe it was just a writer with a really great subject and wanting to promote that subject, but it seems to be the topic of female empowerment. Is that your takeaway, JP?
Yeah, no, it completely is my takeaway. I thought it was really well done. I think, and I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of the fact that like Zeus didn't want anything to do with the Amazons, even when Diana was trying to save them all.
Until they were winners.
That was the female Olympians' little pet project, and Hermes helped them with it. And it was like, they weren't important. He didn't care.
He's a fair weather fan.
And then she saved him, and then he's very easily manipulated into doing this. And Perez gives him a little cover in the fact that it turns into that it was a manipulation. But he was manipulating his baser influence, his baser instincts.
Absolutely.
And so he does in the end make Zeus not completely disgusting. But yeah, it does set up this whole trial, and you get to see Zeus and Hercules' views on the Amazon change and through this trial. But yeah, I thought it was really well done, because it was if you read, like you said, the mythology of lore, Zeus is not, Zeus is not a feminist. Let's just put it that way.
No, not in the slightest possible way.
So, and you see the other gods like kind of stand up and like help Diana, give her this opportunity to do what she needs to do. And you see, and I think her relationship with Hippolyta really like benefits from this arc, because initially Hippolyta is just bitter about man's world and somewhat overprotective of her daughter, and you get to see some depth through this, of more depth of why she's the way she is, and her growing in her respect for Diana as a woman and an adult and someone that can stand on her own. So I think that benefits from this as well. Like their relationship is very well developed through this,
and I think it gives solid footing to Hippolyta's motherly instincts to protect her daughter from the world of man, because we've seen the caveman sequences, the Hercules sequences that demonstrate her past trauma and the reason she would ride out to fight Zeus and to face her god. The boldness to face your god, knowing that God exists, and to confront them on their hypocrisy is bold.
Yeah.
So all of that for me adds up to an interesting look at 80s feminism and the evolving role of Wonder Woman in the DC universe. I think there's a lot of fun things to discuss there. I don't know, Ryan, I kind of like gave you a giant ball of twine to play with. What do you want to do?
I like this story arc a lot because it also it touches on many things. Number one, we find out what's inside Doom's doorway. What is this great evil that the Amazons are tasked with holding the rest of the earth away from? We find out what's inside there. That's interesting. We find out she's not necessarily named Diana after the goddess of the hunt. That thread comes back. As I mentioned earlier, the flashing thunder, the gun on Themyscira, that gets explained in this story arc, how that gun got to Themyscira. That to me is, I really like the omnibus as a whole, but that's a standout story for me. Yeah. But you really need the previous stories to get you to that story too. They're just as important to get there to enjoy it. But this has always been one of my favorite parts. And I love the fact that they actually made a retail poster based on that trifold cover. Which is that. So they made a poster for that. So
sorry, let me blow
which is the actual cover of the hardcover, not the.
Yeah, when you take the dust jacket off, that's what you get.
If you take the dust jacket off, you get that poster of the trial of the Amazons.
That's so cool.
A little side note too: you only get that trifold cover if you bought the direct edition. If you bought the newsstand, you didn't get no trifold
on that single issue.
Yeah.
Got it.
So there's a lot of things that I like about that story arc.
Yeah.
One thing I don't like, though, there's one thing I don't like, and that is when Hercules and Hippolyta are reunited, she pretty quickly her feelings soften a little bit. And I thought, I don't know if I like that so much.
She forgives him too easily. He needs
a little
to jump
fast,
through more hoops. Yeah, because there is almost like a hint of love there.
There is.
Yeah.
But for me, the highlight was seeing Diana carry him out of the Diana carrying Hercules out. He's wearing like a thong, and she's like saving him like you would, often see a Superman character rescuing a damsel in distress.
He's the damsel in distress in that.
Yes. The male character is put in a skimpy outfit and rescued and flown to safety by the female superhero. There's something for me that tickles me and makes me laugh that I find hilarious about that. And then of course Hercules gives a speech of apology to the Amazons and owns his screw up. Now, Ryan might be right to say that they forgive
I'm back to that page, and it's like all of the Amazons quickly are just like,
So in a different time, later on there was JLA versus Avengers, which George Perez worked on. Here's the trade paperback that many people couldn't ever even get a copy of. Yeah. And in this issue, there's a moment, if you might remember, Hercules is an Avenger.
Yes.
And there's a moment where Diana meets Hercules and she finds out who he is, and she says, Hercules, you're the spoiler of Hippolyta. And I'm like, ooh. And she's ready to duke it out with him right then.
He's like, don't go sleeping with my mom.
That's right. Completely, like I said, different version of it, but interesting to note. So.
All right. So, JP, you wanted to discuss Cersei a little bit. You wanted to get into her storyline a little.
So, and just in case anybody Diana goes, this whole storyline is she goes to Greece and we meet the witch Cersei, which is one of her longtime villains. And if anybody thinks that Perez, being a feminist, is not going to sexy up the characters, there is our image, the first image of Cersei. Not the cover, but where she is in the last page.
She's casual clothing, and then you got your bondage. You got your bondage in there.
You got your bondage, yeah.
yeah, she's got bondage going on, and she's like skimpy clothes, and yeah, Press doesn't shy away from that side of things either. So,
No. You got to give your audience a little bit of what they came for, right?
Yeah.
But what were your thoughts on Cersei and how they utilize her? Because obviously, the second portion of this omnibus focuses a lot on that storyline.
So I found this very interesting because, like, I know Odysseus's interaction with Cersei. Like, I know who, like, from the
Odyssey.
From the Odyssey, that I know that version of Cersei, and I know, like, the last 10 or 12 years of comics of Cersei, in like more current Wonder Woman comics, and she's always like dressed almost like in a business suit, and she got short red hair, and she's like very, matter of fact. And then I know the only version of Cersei I know, kind of this version, is from like the old Justice League cartoon, like where she makes like one or two appearances, like where she's a little bit like this. So this was a very different, like, I wasn't sure what I was going to get. Obviously, I'd seen the cover of her in the green dress and that kind of stuff. So I thought this was super interesting. I think of the introduced villain, like historic, like outside the mythology of Cheetah, Silver Swan, and Cersei. Well, Cersei gets the most to do. Like, she's not as cut abruptly as the other two are. So I think that helps. But I thought this was the best of the arcs that one of these villains got.
I mean, the focus on villains up to now has been very negligible. Obviously, Ares gets a presence, but Cheetah gets an issue and a half. The White Swan gets an issue and a half. Most of it is battling beasts, creatures, monsters with like a villain hovering deep in the background. Cersei obviously gets forefront attention.
And I thought her reasoning for why she sort of fears Diana and what she's trying to do, like how she got the backstory we get on how she actually became like an immortal witch and got the powers of Hecate, like, I enjoyed that. I thought that was like the motivation was solid. I felt like it made sense. It, like, when she feared that like Diana was a path that could ultimately take that away from her. And so like her very existence in man's world was a threat to Cersei, and that Cersei was basically, she's basically angry Amazon that's never forgiven men, sort of. Like, it's not, I mean, she's not an Amazon, but that's basically her, like, she Diana's peace and bringing everyone together, and Cersei's like, no, I want men and women to.
She's almost unwilling to drop the hatchet, bury the hatchet that Hippolyta seems so quickly to drop.
Yeah, I mean, well, it goes back to like the story of like men being turned into pigs and stuff on her island and that kind of stuff. So it's very that she's very much still battle of the sexes, kind of, doesn't want Diana to succeed. That she draws power from that conflict.
Totally. Some great comments going on here. Nate says, Zeus needs character growth. You're not wrong. Bobby's saying Hercules. I guess that's right. Yes, the JLA Avengers story. And by the way, I'm talking to Ryan next week for more Avengers versus JLA next week. So get ready for that.
Not exactly, but a little different story.
It's similar. Bobby says, drawing the sexy Cersei is my kind of feminist. There you go. I get that. Cersei having being an antithesis to Wonder Woman, or being a yin to her yang in some way, is kind of interesting. Ryan, what were your thoughts on this version of Cersei?
I echo a lot of what JP said. She's a witch with a mission now, and before she was just kind of a witch. And I think back to one of the later, if not last, appearances that Cersei made in Volume 1 of Wonder Woman pre-Crisis. So forgettable. The character and the story, so forgettable. But she comes here and she makes an impact. And it feels like a lot of dots are finally getting connected that never got connected before with the character and her expanded universe.
Yeah, and it makes for an interesting story when you have a greater detailed backstory connection between some of this stuff. I don't know, Ryan. I feel like we've covered a lot of the topics I wanted to get to. We're about an hour and 20 minutes in. Is there something that you're like, wait, we skipped this? I wanted to spend a little time on this.
The only thing that I really wanted to mention, and I actually talked about this on my Instagram yesterday, Wonder Woman started publishing in the 1940s. It wasn't until 1988 that she ever got her first annual.
Oh, yeah, the annual.
Volume 1 had no annuals. None. Okay. And think about that. I mean, almost every other title had at least one annual, you know?
Right.
Let alone for a character that was pretty well known, even though she didn't sell. But
and
she
found 24 issues and only one annual, which really goes to show you that they're not annual.
And another thing, one thing I wanted to ask you about this omnibus specifically, they did not include the Action Comics 600, even though George Perez was the inker to John Byrne on that. But it's heavily referenced, and that's where that's where a Darkseid invades
Olympus.
And do you feel not including that?
Which they reference as one of her trials. Like,
do you feel not including that in this omnibus was a mistake?
So it comes back to, because that's a specific issue, but we also got like the whole thing with her trials of like who was manipulating Zeus led into like the crossover with the Manhunters thing, and like So yeah, I thought having the crossover was like, oh, even in the 80s we had these stupid crossover issues. But yeah, I did feel a little weird because we do jump in and like Olympus is destroyed. Like we jump from her trials and then later Olympus is destroyed and the gods are leaving and there's this whole thing of, that we get. So it did feel a little bit left out. And we got the whole thing where she sort of has a crush on Superman and then she doesn't. We don't see any of that. So yeah, I felt a little bit not knowing that it was just one issue. Now that I know it's just one issue, I feel more left out than I did thinking it was maybe multiple issues that we missed or whatever and something else. But
yeah, well, this was Action 600. Of course, it was a longer issue for an anniversary issue. And there was a little bit leading up to it. Like she appeared in a page and a half in the Adventures of Superman prior to that. Okay. But I mean, that was about it. And actually in that appearance, he kisses her and she's like, whoa. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I misread the situation. I thought that's what you wanted. And then she kind of realizes that's not what she wanted.
Yeah.
And I think since George Perez was involved in Action Comics 600, it was a mistake not to include that in this omnibus because the issues that were published after that are referenced back to that event.
Yeah.
A few times. So
I can see that argument, and it looks like Nate agrees as well. I have no knowledge of all those other things. So when they referenced it to JP's point, it seemed like a lot of issues were that were separate.
Well, I think there's more than one event there. There's
there's the Manhunters thing that you mentioned, and then there's the Darkseid. Yeah. And for me, it just seemed like a greater universe JLA kind of topic that didn't necessarily feel vital, and not knowing how many issues and what it all entailed. I was fine to just roll with it, but I was definitely curious to know what was going on and how it impacted this saga.
The fact that you say it's one issue that particular part of it was one issue as opposed to like just a bigger Justice League story or something that I didn't, which is what I sort of assumed. And I'm sure the Manhunters thing was probably a bigger Justice League story.
It was.
But like the fact that it's one issue is like, oh, that would have been nice to have. When I didn't know it was just one issue, I was like, it's fine. it was like from that perspective. So
yeah, for sure. JP, anything that you feel like you were like, no, we didn't touch on this bit from the omnibus that I really wanted to get into? I feel like overall we've definitely, for all these. I think there's 5 or 6 different storylines that occur in these 24 issues or 25 issues. Is there anything you feel like we should reference or mention?
The only thing that I would go back to, maybe like the annual, I thought was interesting that Brian brought up, is that we get to see people, Julia and Nessa, go to Themyscira, and we get to see their perspective, and like we get some fun stories there, and that she actually had a connection to the Amazons already, which was an interesting little, I don't know if it was a necessary addition, but it was kind of a fun addition, I guess. I thought that issue was well done, that we got to see the flip side of not just Diana, the fish out of the water, but you got to see other people be in her world. I thought that was a fun addition to the volume that was important. And then I did think it was interesting that like we see, we continue, even after all the stuff here, we continue to see the foils of the gods. When we see Hermes, when all the other gods have left, and Hermes decides, I'm going to show up and fix everybody's problems, and they're going to love me. And, and Diana's going to love me, which appears to be at least a big part of his motivation, in addition to like everybody else. I thought that we didn't quite get there, but not one of the better ones, but I thought it was interesting that we're continuing to get, like, it just indicates to me that we're going to, even though the gods supposedly left, that Perez isn't going to drop that thread as it moves forward.
Right.
In terms of continuing to use that history as a part of her story, which I think is important. So.
And I will say, to reference that annual in some way, what I also really loved about this omnibus was the ways in which it showed me how clearly what Tom King's doing right now references this era. And he has a story in one issue where she takes a little boy to Themyscira and lets him experience and it hearkened to this annual in a big way. And there's lots of comments to this run, whether it's the way in which Trinity is created out of clay, and there's just clear connectivity that it made me more impressed with what Tom King is doing because of how well it is built on the history of this. So that was fun as well. I guess that's the beauty of going back and reading these older issues and having creators who are working now have affection for them and continue to draw from them.
Yeah. So I usually recommend this volume to people because frequently I get asked, okay, what should I read on Wonder Woman? And this is where I start them at.
Sure.
What do you guys think? Is that your new readers to it? What do you think? Is this a good introduction to the character?
Oh yeah, I think this is it's clear they gave Perez not a clean slate, but within the boundaries of what we generally know, stick to that and do your thing. And I think he took what the character was and told a great story that gives you the basis of who Wonder Woman and Diana is, in terms of what her real motivations are, why she does what she does. She's not trauma child Batman. She's not the alien, thing. She's from another world, but she has this particular mission. She has this background, and that it is about peace and truth, and the basis for where the lasso comes from, and the basis for the bracelets. And I enjoyed one of the things we didn't talk about, like all the spirits that, like in the origin, like all the spirits that they used to create the Amazons. The one that she was always there, but she just didn't get born when the rest of them did.
Yeah.
And like she just came later. She was always part of that group.
She was saved for a special purpose.
She was saved for a later mission that they knew that she would be needed for. And so, I don't know that you can get a better introduction to her as a character, really. Like, in terms of if you don't know much about the character and you just want to start, I can't imagine recommending something different than this.
Fair.
I also think it's interesting to note, and I'm glad that we're getting a chance to mention this. As a creator, you might think, well, George Perez knew that he was slaying this the moment that that these issues came out. But in honesty, he was asked, I think it was a 2017 or 18 interview. He said he did not realize his impact on Wonder Woman, the character, until the first Gal Gadot movie came out. And I mean, to us, we knew long before then, but he didn't realize it. And it's the fact that they used so much of his Wonder Woman in that movie. He also said he got a 6-digit check as a residual that DC did not have to do off of that movie.
Wow.
Just because they used so much of his concepts.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's also great to note too, and this is a quote, he has said, quote, Wonder Woman is a personal triumph for me.
Yeah.
And this is a man that had huge, I mean, he made most of his money with Teen Titans characters, you know, and he did Crisis on Infinite Earths, which, and we never even mentioned how detailed his artwork is on every single flip and page.
Yeah, we didn't talk enough about the art tonight. That's for sure.
It's amazing. But there's a little insight to you to where they're at. And John, I know you got a few other things that you want to say. I just want to say before we wrap up the stream, I'd like to show a couple things too.
Yeah, as I say, I don't have a whole lot more I want to say. Actually, I'm kind of nearing the end.
Okay, then I can show some stuff real quick.
Some people that definitely agree that this is the starting point that they would utilize. So Nate and Bobby both agreeing with you that you got. Yeah, you have some stuff you want to show.
Yeah, real quickly. So these Wonder Woman trades were broken up, you know, into. The omnibus was broken up into individual trades. And you can find the trades anywhere, but I thought you might be curious to see the Brazilian version of these. So there's the front of volume 1 and the back.
Nice.
And then we have volume 2 and the back. These are from my friend Andre in Brazil.
Yeah, I remember you opening those.
And here's another one.
There it is.
And look on the back. Kissy, kissy.
Yeah.
And then volume 4. And then one more thing I wanted to show. Absolute Wonder Woman. Doesn't cover as many issues as the omnibus does.
Yeah.
But look, you guys have no idea how beautiful this thing is in person.
No.
Those absolute editions are absolutely wild.
So it's called Gods and Mortals. And I just wanted to share that a little bit. And finally,
still in the plastic, Ryan? It's still.
Well, it's only like I have like 10 versions of this.
So disappointed.
So
how do you know it's beautiful in there? How do you know that it looks even more amazing in there? How do you know?
I know. And one last thing that you can take me off of the showcase screen, but one last thing that I just want to say before we wrap up. JP, do you have a great relationship with your mailman?
My mailman?
Yeah.
It's an okay relationship, but lately everything's been slow because we
noticed
kissing, hugging, any of that.
I noticed. So tomorrow, kick him in the shins when he delivers the package that you were supposed to open on this stream tonight.
Oh, okay.
A-okay, coming your way.
Apparently, I didn't like.
It's been in Kansas City for days, and still didn't get to you today.
Well,
you don't know how upset I am.
It's not even the post office. Like I had a box of CGC books that I sent off like in October that was in the FedEx was going to deliver it on Monday. And they told me I need to be home because it's a signature. They didn't deliver it Monday. They said Tuesday. They didn't deliver it Tuesday. They said Wednesday. They didn't deliver it Wednesday. They never did say today. And so maybe I'll get it tomorrow, but we have everything has been terrible the last 2 weeks since we got the snow and ice. Like everything has just been sitting. They have not been delivering crap.
Well, there is something that I sent to you. It's nothing huge, but it ties into tonight and it ties into your collection perfectly.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little remembrance and a small thank you for your friendship to me.
Oh,
so
that's awesome, man. So yeah, we'll have to hopefully it shows up tomorrow and
I hope
we'll set something up and show it off. But
okay.
I love Nate talking about people not realizing their impact.
Yeah, the fact that he got, you say that he didn't know, but the fact that he got that confirmation by that movie, because there is a ton of that movie that's in here. Like the whole thing with Ares is taken right basically from this book. I mean, other than it's World War I instead of like just a random conflict that's here,
right?
Like modern 80s conflict or whatever. But like the Ares stuff, the just her mom and her training and the bracelets and like all of like
the competition, the trial competition to be chosen to leave the island.
Yeah. I highly recommend watching the first animated movie as well, because that heavily draws off of this. If you've never seen
that, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yes.
Like
hide in the corner in shame.
I know. I so few animated DC stuff I've seen.
It's an interesting thing because it was one of the early ones they did, and it was like the worst received in terms of sales when it first came out, and then, but it's like the one that has maintained sales the best, like in terms of people buying that video and
finding it.
Like it took people time to find it, but once they did, like it's like it's really, really good. I would highly recommend. I would guess it's on the app.
It's not on the Max, but a whole bunch of animated DC properties moved over to Tubi, which is the free streaming.
Okay.
And I think I can't 100% say it's there, but I think it is.
It's not completely inspired by this, but it's
heavily.
It's an origin. It is an origin that it's fairly consistent with this. It's been a while since I've seen it, but yeah.
I'll have to look for it. And
it's more of
the fact that it's not on Max kind of just.
But otherwise, it's
Max just took off the TV show. They have the two Gal Gadot movies, and that's it right now.
Disappointing. So obviously, huge thank you to JP and Ryan for participating in this, for adding so much insight, knowledge, appreciation for this series. It was my first time diving into this world, and I absolutely adored it. It was phenomenal, and now we all get to try to wait for John and Ryan to find Volume 2 Omnibus somewhere for not $300.
Yes.
So it'll be a battle of patience for poor JP, who's got to wait for us.
There's another Omni sitting over there that we might be able to read in the meantime.
Yes, we all have the Diana Prince Omnibus.
Yeah. The mod era.
The mod era is in the wings, always in the wings. The links for Ryan and for Jason's channels, Instagrams, everything is all down below, so you can find them and enjoy all their content, the things that they're constantly creating. A huge thank you for those of you in the chat hanging out with us tonight. We still got 10. Yeah, we still got 10 people rolling with us, chatting with us, dropping comments, and I appreciate all of you. JP, Ryan, and I all have Omnis in our collection that we're going to read next. I don't know that we have any overlap necessarily,
but maybe not necessarily next. But yeah,
it's hard to know which omnibus might be the next one that we all get together to discuss. I will say I'm plagued by Omnis that I have yet to read. So there are many.
There's a bunch over there. There's several over there that I could dig into next.
I've got a lot of options, so we'll see where it goes next. I appreciate all the
thank you for inviting me tonight. I really appreciate it.
We're talking Wonder Woman. You're invited.
If you think we were going to do this and not invite you, then you don't really understand us. I'm just gonna say. As far as my channel coming up, I wanted to just mention that on Saturday I'm doing a little thing to remember a channel member, a channel friend, a channel community member friend that we lost last year. So from I'm going to try to remember 5 to 7 Eastern. I'm going to have a whole slew of who's who community members in the chat talking and on the panel to discuss Jennifer and share books. It's a book club hangout. We're going to give you recommendations of all kinds of things, indies, Marvel, DC stuff that you should read or that you'll laugh that Jennifer hated or loved in one way or another. It's going to be pretty entertaining overall. Hopefully light on tears, heavy on laughs. That will be this coming Saturday from 5 to 7 Eastern, and I'll be hosting it right here on my channel. The video or the live stream is already there, so you can hit that notification bell and be notified when we go live. But fun who's who community member stuff. I know a lot of people are busy working that day and unable to attend. So things happening in life. But if you have a book that reminds you of Jen or will always remind you of Jen, yeah, shoot me the title. I'm going to have times in between groups where I'm going to be highlighting other books that people want to mention. Just fun ways of having comics be that connective glue to bring people together in the great way that Jen always did. So that's this coming Saturday. I don't know if I'll do my morning show, and I don't think I'll have any juice left in the tank to do a night show, but I'll definitely be live at least once on Saturday. Guys, anything you want to mention? Ryan, I know Ryan's got his recent pickups. He's got his comic book editions of the week video that already dropped.
That will actually start back. We took a little break for the holiday, and those will start back next week. This Sunday, we'll have Fanboys Live and the Retro Review, and our show is going to the dogs for the first one of 2025. So
crypto, maybe
some could crypto be. You'll have to tune in, and my regular content will start resuming next week as well. So this was kind of my first foray back into YouTube for 2025, and it's nice to do with great friends.
Well, and with George Perez Wonder Woman as well, right?
Well, that's a great friend to me as well.
Yeah.
Right. JP, I know you've got your Saturday video that drops every single Saturday, your look back video. I know that Tuesdays Mondays you're hanging out with Circumstances and doing your recent looks at the is it hot, is it not, is it worth your time and money because it's on the spec list right now. But I know you're also doing indie review shows, and I know that I've got to catch up on 100 Bullets because that's coming up here soon.
Yeah, we got not next week, the week after. So we got little time.
What else am I missing on the budget collecting channel?
Consistently, just like the whatever reports in terms of the Saturdays, which actually will happen Saturday, even though originally it wasn't going to. My plans have changed, so there will be a whatever report Saturday, but they're still will not be able to make the earlier in the afternoon session.
That's my favorite show on the JP Budget channel. I know he always scoffs and shakes his head at it. It's my favorite thing that that he does on his channel.
I'm always at the
I just like to give you a hard time because you schedule a lot of stuff for Saturday because it's a convenient time to do videos. So you're often live at the same time, and you claim that it's your favorite.
I have to do the replay and the rewind later. Yeah.
Poor JP is stuck going, well, Lasso's still in the chat. Giving me lists of Let's Collect characters.
That's what I can count on.
I should be done with my stream well before 6 my time, 9 Eastern. So if you are bored and need someone to ramble with you, I'm happy to hang. But
if you want to unbox on Saturday, you could do that.
That could be a fun.
We have to.
Now we're talking.
Hopefully it will be here by then.
If it isn't, I mean, I'm mad already. You don't want to see me. I'm going to be madder than a wet hornet.
Like literally, I had a box, like not the last one, but the one before of Midtown Books, sat in Kansas City for 10 days.
Don't even. I'm not going to sleep tonight.
I mean, I've had a FedEx box.
He's been talking. He's been talking to me about this for over a week. So.
Although he doesn't know what it is.
I don't know what it is, but I've just been hearing about it.
If we get it, maybe we'll do that on. We'll get the gang back together and we'll do an unboxing on.
Will you let me know when it arrives?
I will let you know when it arrives.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you to you guys. Thank you to the chat. And I'm going to get everybody out of here before 1 hour and 45 minutes, which is impressive to me that we're under 2 hours. So
good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.